Welcome to this panel discussion, everybody. Let's start by introducing the group. Composer Joel Thompson.
Hello, my name is Joel Thompson. I am the composer of the 7 last words of the Unarmed.
Lauren.
Hello, my name is Lauren Fitzgerald. I'm an artist activist, and I am the founder of Strategize 619.
Pastor Faison.
My name is Pastor John Faison, Senior Pastor of Watch and Grow Baptist Church here in Nashville.
Margaret.
Hello, I'm Margaret Campbell-Holman. I'm the Executive Director of Choral Arts Link and the founder of the Met Singers.
Kelly.
I'm Kelly Corcoran. I'm the Artistic Director and Conductor of Intersection.
Patrick.
Hello, I'm Patrick Dailey. I am a professional opera singer based in Nashville and serving on the voice faculty at Tennessee State University and founder of the Big Blue Opera Initiatives.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm Colleen Phelps, the host of Classically Speaking. I'm not Steve Swenson. I'm just borrowing his Zoom account. That's our CEO of Nashville Public Radio. So thanks to him for the loan today. Joel, just in case someone is tuning into this talk not having watched the online video of either performance of the 7 last words of the Unarmed, give us an overview of the piece.
The piece is inspired by a pictogram series on Twitter by the Iranian-American journalist Shirin Bargi, who paired a simple image with the last words of unarmed Black men killed by authority figures. And so it is a collection of that based on the liturgy of the 7 last words of Christ, 7 unarmed Black men and their last words set to music in an elegiac, passion-like format.
And just so we can hear that text, the full text of the piece, I've asked 3 of you to read it, if you would. So starting with the first one.
The first movement is, "Officers, why do you have your guns out?" The last words of Kenneth Chamberlain, Senior, 66.
The second movement.
What are you following me for?
The third.
Mom, I'm going to college.
The fourth.
I don't have a gun. Stop shooting. Michael Brown, 18.
The fifth.
You shot me. You shot me.
The sixth.
It's not real.
The seventh.
I can't breathe. Eric Garner, 43.
I'll admit that when I approached actually going to listen, I saw the text first and I just paused on it. I just needed a minute before I was ready to listen. Kelly, when you first took this piece on and looked at the score to conduct it with Intersection and listened to it, what did you think?
Well, it's such a powerful work that speaks to the moment of our time, but it's also timeless, right? And so I thought, my goodness, we have to find a way to share this work with the audiences of Nashville, but we have to do it in a way where the community is a part of that process and has voice within that process, and is able to live with the work for some time. We brought in chorus members from Fisk University, Lipscomb, TSU, the Celebration Chorus that works on the MLK concert every year at the Symphony Chorus. Of course, Margaret was a partner along the way. She's the one who brought the work initially to us to bring forward in the community. And so we knew we had to invite a long conversation surrounding this work before we could bring it to audiences here in Nashville.
Joel, so often after tragedies we hear it's too soon for something. It's too soon for advocacy. It's too soon for legislation. It's too soon to make art about it. People are grieving. How did you know that the time was right?
Well, those questions and those excuses, to be honest, never entered my mind because the piece originated as a personal endeavor. It was for me to provide a sense of catharsis in response to the seeming lack of concern on the part of most of America about my life and the lives of Black people in this country. And so it was a way for me to process my own grief and pain in response to that. And in terms of finding out when it was right to share it, I think I reached a boiling point. Freddie Gray died a few months after I had written it. And I figured maybe I could do something as an artist. There's a certain futility that one might feel, that you're dedicating your life to this craft, but yet it's not actually changing something. But I decided to challenge that assumption and try and see it through. And so a few months after that, Dr. Rogers premiered it at the University of Michigan with the Men's Glee Club there. And it's been leading to conversations and future performances, such as the one that took place in Nashville a few years ago. So I'm very grateful for that.
Kelly, applying a similar question to programming, have you ever had a piece or topic for which you felt like Intersection's audience isn't ready yet, and how have you worked toward it?
I think that music can speak things that words cannot speak. And I think it's important that we confront the issues of our time. And so this concept of readiness, we're not going to wait to perform this repertoire. It needs to be performed now. And so instead, what we've done is thought about how can we frame this repertoire? How can we invite a conversation surrounding the repertoire? So there's been a lot of things that we've done to do that with Joel's work, also with the work of Hannibal Lukumbe that we did last year as well. And part of that is, framing the performance itself. For Joel, when he was in town, he spoke to the audience right before we performed the work, spoke about each of the men that their words were in the piece. With Hannibal, we had a walk of love right before we performed his work. So framing the work, so the audience is invited before they even receive the music to kind of think about what they're about to hear. Certainly also the performers, are they ready, right? It's a really emotional process to perform this repertoire. And so the chorus, we worked with partners like the Civil Rights Room at the library. We rehearsed there, and they engaged in a civil society curriculum, through the rehearsal process. Margaret and I shared those rehearsals, and we both were engaging in that leadership. And, we were kind of chronicling their thoughts along the way, asking them questions along the way. So we tried to invite both the performers and the audience to have opportunities to share their feelings and their experience of the piece, and kind of, be invited into that space before they heard the music. But nonetheless, music is powerful, and no matter what you do to be ready to hear a powerful piece, you can't always anticipate how you're going to feel in that moment.
Pastor Faison, I'd like to explore the deeper meaning of the 7 last words. I know entire dissertations and sermons could be written, but fairly concisely. Could you give us some background on the 7 last sayings of Christ on the cross?
Absolutely. These sayings really point to Christ's final moments and final words, the final chapter, if you will, of Christ's human story. These powerful words, though small and seeming to be concise, they carry so much weight that they speak. Each phrase has a story in and of itself. And so to take that same kind of parallelism and attach it to the story of unarmed men, I think is genius, number one. But it also shows the ways in which music and artists have a way of shaping a soundtrack for social change and systems that need to be addressed. And the 7 last sayings are really memorialized and remembered every single year. When we go through the cycle of the Passion of Christ, where we go through all the way from Monday, Thursday to Good Friday, leading up to Easter Sunday morning, remembering those 7 last words, while they come from a painful context, they really become this consistent reminder that something bigger, something greater is happening. That we don't skip all the way to the triumphant moment of the resurrection without really sitting in Christ's blood-stained rags, right? Without detaching the moment from the emotion and the pain and the agony, particularly of the folks who actually watched Jesus die. Many of the words that are spoken in the 7 last words of Christ are spoken to particular characters and people in the story. And so those words then create space and room to even tell the stories of the listeners and the hearers and those who were involved in that space. So the words really concretize the steps and the stages of Christ's agony that ultimately lead to his triumph and his resurrection. But you can't get to resurrection if you don't first sit in the grief and the angst and the agony of death.
Joel, with that in mind, can you talk about relating this text you had seen to Christ's 7 last words?
Yes. Thank you, Pastor Faison, for those words. My affinity to those words, to that liturgy, is due to the fact that I feel that they illuminate the humanity of Christ. There's lots of emphasis on his divinity and the miracles performed and all of that. But when Jesus says, "I'm thirsty," you can't help but recognize that he is in a human body. And for that reason, the liturgy was a template for me to humanize these men. We'd sort of gone in the opposite direction for these men and made them seem less than human, in order to justify their deaths, in order to make it seem as if they were supposed to die and therefore not examine our own complicity. And so these last words provided a lot of inspiration in that regard. And I used it as a template. So for example, the third last saying on the cross is to Mary, his mother, Jesus' mother, and John, his beloved disciple. Mother, this is thy son, son, this is thy mother. And for that maternal connection, I chose Amadou Diallo's last words, Mom, I'm going to college. The last saying in the liturgy is, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And the last movement, 7 last words of the Unarmed is, I can't breathe. That connection of spirit and breath was something that was important to me. And so I used, yes, the liturgy to organize the last words of the unarmed men, but not to deify them in any way, but to make them human again, to honor their legacies. It's really about them and their families and that loss that we all feel.
Patrick, you performed the piece from the chorus. You're a young Black man. Tell us about the experience.
Oh man. You know, I will say it was really one of the most rewarding experiences that I've had artistically. Not often as a classical artist do you get to perform something that is so fit for your body. Leontine Price often talked about when she portrayed the role of Aida, it was the first time that she could actually step into the role, you know, not having to be made up differently. And that work provides that opportunity, but in a very real way that makes you come to grips with things, to come to grips with your own and your own reality, right? I actually was the soloist for the third movement. And it's more of a tenor baritone solo, so that was not my fault, as many of you know. But when Maestro Corcoran asked me to do it, I was like, okay, I'll do this. And I would do it in rehearsal, and I thought I was getting my mind wrapped around this, that I was fine, like fine. I stood there in the chapel of Fisk University, stepping out in front to sing these words, Mom, I'm going. And it's brilliant because the way that Joel kind of like dictates it, it's very long. It makes you really stretch into the body, into the singing to do it, to sing, Mom, I'm going to college. And that was me. Like I sang that standing, and it was so interesting because, you know, my impetus for studying music and for going this route was the Jubilee Singers. So to stand in the chapel at Fisk, where I had what has inspired me, and to say, Mom, I'm going to college, which is something I said almost from birth, and then to have gone, right, and to actually have had the opportunity to go not once but twice. That's something that our dear brother, who is now an ancestor, can't say. And that's actually something that many people who have been lost in this fashion cannot say. And so it was such a buckling experience. Like I was literally shaking, and I could not stop shaking throughout the performance. I was still shaking through it, even probably after. I was still shaking, just because it was so real, and it I think to this day it haunts me in a beautiful way. I don't want it to sound like it's a scary thing. It haunts me. It follows me, because it actually continues to inform the work that we do in this community, that I do, and that we're passionate about.
Margaret, Choral Arts Link is students. They're Gen Z. It's a very activism-centered generation. So what were the conversations like with them while you were preparing the piece?
There were many conversations. It was how to introduce the context of this piece with the children. And I wanted to expand it a bit, because the conversations I'm going to share occurred not only with that segment of young people, but it occurred, and Kelly can speak to this, it occurred in the rehearsals. In the rehearsal with the children, only a few of those, well, they were all there in the audience. They didn't do the performance, but we prepared them because we knew this was a piece that needed to be done, that had to be done. It was timely. But I wanted to make sure in anything we do, when I prepare children to perform or go to a performance, I want them to understand the context of what's going on. And so what they bring into listening gives them something to take back in terms of understanding. So a lot of the comments I had for the children actually came during the performance, because I made sure I was sitting in the audience. I could not be anywhere in the performance. I mean, it's all male chorus. You know, Kelly at one point said, "Do you want to conduct?" I went, "No," because I knew I would not emotionally be able to make it through that piece. Plus, I know what Kelly can do in bringing music to life. So the children afterwards, and I'll talk about the high schoolers, some of them were struck. Let me put it in this context. You have dreams and you have dreams, but the awakening is what I want to speak to. And this is what I saw in the children's comments and the adults in some of the rehearsals. You can awake suddenly, you can awake easily and be bright and clear, and you can awake, as I call, in the clouds. You're still not quite ready yet. And you're sure you did dream something, but you're not sure what that is and don't know if it's going to come back to you or not. I saw those phases in the comments. I had youth, high school youth, who weren't sure what to grasp. Maybe their experiences aren't where mine were, but they knew there was something deep there. And so some of them, the discussions were very deep in terms of where their context was coming from. They were awed by the music. One child said, "It just surrounded me." And it didn't make her feel bad. It's just that she felt immersed in what was going on and trying to put together what those words were, especially there are parts in some of the movements where there's layering going on and the voices layer and then they extend, and the children were drawn into that, which I thought was fascinating. Another child, young adult, youth, was interested in, what does that do for me? How do I take this and use it? So she's trying to figure out, this has impacted me in a way, but I'm not sure where to place it in my life. And so she has since then has begun to do other things in other ways and fulfill her life through social justice. One story I do want to share from working with the adults, which is again, going back to these different awakenings, and there were different levels of awakenings that go on, not only with each movement, but within each movement. It brings you in and it moves you somewhere else, sometimes where you don't expect to be at the end of it. There was a gentleman who included his singers, and before he did it, he wanted to make sure he was on spot with doing this at his university. So he called his son up. And his son said, "Dad, you better do this." So his whole men's group came and performed. And this man stood next to his son and sang this. And he said it was the most wonderful experience he's ever had. There's another group of men who came in, and the next time they brought some younger men. A father had brought his son. So the context of family being a part of this was to plant seeds that no matter what awakening area they're dealing with, there's someone to converse about. Because for me, it has to be about this continued conversation, not what's the hot topic now. It has to continually be discussed. If it's not continually done something with, words to action, then it doesn't do anything. That's what I feel this piece has done again and again, because I know it's been performed here. Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong. Another group did this maybe a year or so ago. But when we first brought it to Nashville, the whole idea was we have to do this piece. Is it time to do it? And some people said, no, I'm not sure. Their awakening was cloudy. Kelly and I said, we have to do this piece.
Sometimes the first place the world can take on a difficult issue is the arts. Sometimes it's a mural, sometimes it's a piece of music, sometimes it's a novel or a poem. Lauren, in your experience, what's an effective goal for sharing a work of art with a direct and current social message, and how can organizations strategize toward a goal like that?
Yeah, so there are a multitude of goals that I think of when I think of what it means to share a work of art with a direct and current social message. One of those goals is that message needs to be relatable. It needs to be either community co-designed or through direct firsthand experience. People need to have some buy-in to what is being presented, and that those stories need to connect to their experiences. The next goal that I kind of think of is that it needs to be relevant, understanding that in this moment, and particularly in history, that yes, all lives matter, but that's not the relevant conversation. Police brutality, prejudice and power dynamics, particularly in racialized situations, that is the major issue. And we have to recognize if Brown, Black, Indigenous voices and lives and culture are undervalued and underrepresented and disregarded, then we're all victims to that oppression. I mean, if you've lost your Indigenous heritage because you became a white American, or if you've been pushed away thousands of miles west because of the Trail of Tears and the War of 1812 and the Indian Removal Act of 1830. So though we're all victims of the oppression of American societal issues. And the number one goal that I think about when creating art is accountability and power sharing, and not tokenizing and symbolizing these voices, and actually making moves in systems and institutions that can actually shift the change of experiences of Black people, Indigenous people, of brown people, people of color in our society. Cultural organizations, cultural bearers, and art makers have to be accountable to Black and Indigenous voices. Take the NFL, for example. When you think about the NFL, who are the players? Black people. But who are the owners? Who are the coaches? The same thing with cultural organizations. We have to take a look at these organizations and think about how we are exploiting narratives, and also thinking about how we can undo that by including their voices at the leadership table and also in investment.
Kelly, I'd like to ask you a similar question about intersection, because your seasons always surround a theme of something you're seeking in the community, or even the idea of community itself. So tell us about your planning process.
Sure. A lot of times it comes from the partners and the repertoire and the voices that we're kind of working with in the community. So sometimes it's repertoire and partners first. I mean, Margaret and I, Choral Arts Link and Intersection, we've been working together for years now. And so we're always talking about sharing ideas of repertoire or ways in which we can support what's happening in our community. So that back and forth between partners and coming up with repertoire ideas, sometimes it starts there. And then that kind of lends itself to a theme. Sometimes it's the opposite. You know, when we worked with Nashville in Harmony, we knew that we wanted to do a concert looking at gender from a non-binary perspective. So we started there with that theme and then looked at repertoire and composers and kind of started there. So it works both ways, but it involves a lot of listening, a lot of collaboration, a lot of really relating to our mission for Intersection, that's contemporary classical music. So we're saying, okay, who are the contemporary voices of today that have not been heard? And how can we do our part to lift up those voices and share those voices with our community? And then, you know, the other part of our mission is changing and shifting perspectives. So how are we doing that? So really looking within our niche and how to work collaboratively. Just, you know, our last season, season 6, we titled it Action. So kind of what Lauren was saying, this idea of action, you know, making our work, and Margaret as well, all of us, right, putting it into action. So sometimes that theme just emerges from the repertoire and work that we're doing. Right now, for our next season, we're going to title it Essentialism, right? Because what is essential right now? Why are the arts essential right now, right? Essential workers, we are essential workers. And so sometimes it's just really trying to listen and think about what is happening in our world today, and all of that comes together into our programming.
Pastor Faison, as a community leader outside of the arts, what are some ways that a leader like you or a teacher or a public personality could facilitate these conversations in harmony with pieces of music like this?
Sure. I am a firm believer that partnership is the new leadership. I wish I could take the credit for that quote, but it's not mine. It's a gentleman named Ty Bennett. But the idea of partnering with folks that have strengths that are different from yours. One of the things about faith communities is that we major in gathering people together. Now, of course, with COVID-19, we've had to be rather creative with the gathering part, but we still have the space to be able to gather people and to share ideas and to communicate truth. And faith spaces are really known for facilitating moments and spaces to wrestle with hard stuff, to talk about difficult subjects, to wrestle with what it means to parallel the 7 last words of unarmed men with the 7 last words of Christ, and how in that space it sits differently. There's a gravity that comes with that can facilitate and open the space for difficult but necessary conversations. So partnership. I'd love to see some discussions, some forums, some environments where we create a space where folks come in and have this conversation and talk about the role of the arts. And in my particular perspective, faith expression, part of the historic Black church in America. And man, there is no movement that doesn't have music to it. There is no social moment that is not attached to some form of artistry that really gives life and breath to those movements and make them transcendent. When you think about movements, you don't necessarily think about the actions that took place, but what you do remember are the sounds. You remember the music. You remember the ways in which people sang and united and connected. And those songs become timeless. It is my prayer, Joel, and I'll say this publicly, it is my prayer that one day, man, the last 7 words of the Unarmed will be out of date. That's my prayer, that it won't have the relevance that it has. Because we'll stop killing unarmed Black people. That's my prayer. But until then, man, keep singing, keep writing, keep sharing, and creating spaces where faith can connect with those moments. I think can create some powerful partnerships.
Along that same topic, Joel, the piece wasn't the only part of the project at the premiere. It looks like there was a website and a documentary and entire plans for different types of ensembles for how to approach their conversation around the piece. Tell us a little bit about the process that built that.
Yeah, just like Pastor Faison said, it's a piece that I hope that will not be relevant. You know, I will probably have to give the talk to my child about how to survive an encounter with an authority figure, and that child will also have to give the same talk to their child. But I hope that my grandchild won't have to. It might be a pipe dream, but it's still something that conjures a lot of hope for me and focuses my work. But it's a part of that hope. It's actually that hope that led to the creation of all of these resources, because we discovered that the piece does start conversation, a necessary conversation that we hope to turn into action. It creates a space that awakens the conscience, I hope, and creates a space for empathy. And so in that space, there needed to be guidelines about how to have culturally competent conversations that protect the peace of those who are afflicted by the same scourge that we are talking about, but also inform those who may not be aware of the nuances of what it's like to be Black, existing as Black in this society. And so the website was developed with a lot of legal resources and a lot of research, primarily done by Rachel Davids, who was a student at the University of Michigan Law School at the time, under the supervision of Margot Schlanger, who is a noted professor of law there. And with their help and Dr. Rogers and I, we, tried to assemble as many things as possible for high school groups, college groups, and even professional groups to bravely and fearlessly tackle these conversations within the ensemble, because as Kelly Corcoran and Margaret Campbell-Holman noted, that it needs the organization and the performing bodies that perform the work need to have conversations among themselves before we start opening this conversation out to their various communities. And so that's how those resources came to be. And I hope that they actually have led to frank and healing conversations.
Patrick, like Pastor Faison said, choirs in Nashville with Black singers have a rich and important history here, and you've expanded that with the W. Crim singers, the Wakanda Chorale. I should just say it that way. What has that experience been like for you?
Oh my goodness. The Wakanda Chorale, W. Crim singers, aka Wakanda Chorale as we say, just a collective of just some of the city's finest singers, artists, actors, performers of all sorts, right? And we pride ourselves on community. We pride ourselves on family and on being a village to ourselves and to others around us, right? And being a part of and building some sort of an institution, an organization like the W. Crim Singers, we stand on like these amazing giant shoulders, right? Of course, the Fitzgerald Singers, even going down to the Fairfield Four, but people who people often don't recognize, the Tennessee A&I concert singers. You have the church traditions, as is brought up, of 15th Avenue and Avenue Baptist Church and First Baptist Capitol Hill, notably, as well as all of the Black churches. Like, so any Black church in Nashville that is over like 50 years old, for the most part, has the tradition of anthem, hymn, great rich singing that just permeated, right? Many of us are either from here or have been brought up within these traditions of our spaces. And if we're not from here, we still are engulfed into that community, right? And so when we came together, it was, and this is even our name, right? It's named for a man, William Crim, who had trained so many of us through the arts, and not only affirmed our gifts and our talents, but also affirmed like our personhood, our humanity, our whole beings, all of our identities. And the same can be said even because many of us are also products of choral arts links and the Met Singers as well. And one of the things that they taught us, through the actions of choral singing, through classical training, through musical theater, is that our dreams, our beings, and our experiences, in whatever way we do them, are boundless. We have no bounds. We can literally do everything and anything that we want, and in whatever fashion that we want it to be. And so when we came together, we're only about like 2 years old now. Like I was looking over our bio, and it just is that we came together almost as a fluke in June of 2018. And through that, we've been able to, just do all sorts of amazing engagements. We're already, a group that's like in our like first year already being on Louis York's album on American Griots. We're featured on, myself and the group are featured on track number 11, I Wonder, performing at, just plug it, might as well, performing at the War Memorial Auditorium and at the Franklin Theater, doing things with Intersection. We did Crucifixion Resurrection with Intersection, making sure that they had the choral forces that they needed, the Color of Music Festival. So, and all of those things that we've been a part of, also translate to where we're going, right? One of the things that I'm big about, and I should also say that the W. Crim Singers are the professional ensemble in residence of the Big Blue ARP initiatives. And so our overall goal is to create opportunities, to create spaces so that our students at Tennessee State, but not just TSU, but Fisk, and in the hood, in North Nashville and South Nashville, where people are need to know that they literally can do anything, and the arts are just the vehicle. We're just doing what our teachers, what Miss Campbell-Holman, what Mr. Krim, what James Scandrick, what Diana Poe, what I'm gonna get in trouble if I keep naming names, but we're literally doing what they taught us to do, right? And so we just keep like moving forward with those actions. We want to show that not just the choral aspect of singing, because we're going to sing the hymns, we're going to sing the anthems, and those are going to be absolutely beautiful. But it's not to say that if you don't sing classical, if you don't sing choral, if you don't sing in the Western European aesthetic, doesn't mean that your art is not valued. Actually, it's the opposite. It's even more of a value that you can live in these two seemingly opposite bodies. You can live in these two seemingly opposite bodies and flourish there. And the other thing too, to that end, me, though I'm from Nashville and I rest on the shoulders of all of these great people, I did not go to school here. I went to school on the East Coast. I went to Morgan State, I went to Boston University, and there were things that were happening in the Baltimore, DC, Maryland, Virginia area. There are things that were happening in New York and in the East Coast through Opera Noir, through Harlem Opera Theater, through Opera Ebony, through Soulful Symphony, so many other organizations. There are things that are happening that I was like, okay, I see what Black art can be beyond just a nice choir, beyond just a nice formation of some voices. We can literally do anything we want. We see our churches doing Handel's Messiah, but it's great to do Handel's Messiah every Christmas, every Advent season. But why not do, the works by Black composers in our churches, and not necessarily do them for the, how can I put this? Not necessarily do them for the consumption of non-Black folks, so that we're just proud of it. And if other people want to be a part of it, they are more than welcome to. But that doesn't limit what we can do. We actually can build amazing, rich programming beyond just the limited scope of what others tell us who we are.
Lauren, with a renewed focus on diversity in a lot of arts organizations right now, through the lens of long overdue protests, what are you hoping to see from musical groups outside of programming music by Black composers, in addition to?
This was a really hard question for me. Because I love works by Black composers. I was like, more of that, please. But at
it's
the
a
same
yes
time,
and.
It's a yes and. So I'm thinking about what leadership in those spaces mean, and what does it mean to be accountable to those voices year round, and not just during Black History Month, and making sure that we're holding each other accountable for what I like to call Kwanzaa 365, meaning all of the principles that come up in Kwanzaa, the cooperative economics, the self-determination, being able to hold ourselves accountable to values that are important to Black experiences, because for 350 years, Black people spent their time building this country. And so we're wanting to go ahead and make sure that we are also holding ourselves accountable and not just tokenizing those voices all year round, and not when it's convenient for them to exploit those voices, and involving them in leadership spaces. So when I think about what does it mean to have representation beyond just, more conducting, but really thinking about multidisciplinary art spaces where much more than just musical instruments, although we are beautiful musical instruments, but we have so much to offer. As a Black woman, I'm also, a multidisciplinary artist that does performance-based work, that is visual arts, that is theater. And so it's not limited to just the hymns and the classical repertoire that we've put out. And so it's about, what does it mean to be able to express in a way that's avant-garde, that's abstract, and being free enough to share those things with the whole gamut of diverse experiences of Black people in this country.
Margaret and Kelly, as leaders of arts organizations, what are you doing to continue to act in solidarity within your organization with issues of social justice? Let's start with Margaret.
That's another loaded question. What are we doing within our organization? Continuing the mantra that every child is important, and that the culture they bring with them is part of the mixture that we work with in the palette of voices that they bring with them. If you think of every child as a culture of one, you define culture of different aspects, different characteristics. Well, every child brings that multiplicity to one space when you're working in a choral setting. But as a leader of that choral setting, you want them to see the multiplicity that's beyond them, beyond the tunnel that's just them and just their family. You want to do it in a safe and energetic and engaging and a learning manner. That's what the arts does. It takes all these different parts of us and puts it in a way. For instance, Joelle, I'm going to use that too. I love that name now. I know how to say it. What you did was you brought us a whole conversation. You brought it for an older group to perform it, but it created conversations that trickle down. For me, that's part of social justice. We can't just talk about it. It has to be words to action. And with this piece, it was song, and the words rode on the melody and the rhythm and the expressiveness, which impacted not only our children, but the families, because our families come to rehearsal. So when Kelly and I work together, we have these glorious discussions that are supposed to be an hour long, and they go on and on and on, because we find this multiplicity. We value the multiplicity that each child brings or each instrument player brings. And then there's a conversation between that and how do we bring them into the conversation of the music. That's how the show that we have done, Call Upon These Shoulders, which is where we premiered Joelle's piece. The whole idea, and several of you have spoken to this, not only do we stand on the shoulders of ancestors in terms of 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, we've got to continue the conversation so the children value that and not drop it away, but keep bringing it into a conversation. So no matter what age group we're working with, because we actually have grades 2 through 12 who work with us chorally. And so when Kelly and I talk about these things, how do we bring these mixtures together with a focus, that reads or is heard and can be talked about at different levels, meaning the ages of the children. So in this particular case, I'll go to Joelle's piece. The shoulders we stand on for that piece, why we wanted to use it, and Kelly, please expound, because I'm going to give it to you in just a minute, are those 7 dead men and all the others. Their voices cannot be heard anymore by them personally, but they continue to speak through the poetry, through the spoken word, through the songs, through the artistry. The Wakanda singers, we had them last year because we did a focus on another set of shoulders. The Freedom Riders. Each of these are accessible through the arts with some very painful discussions. But the painful discussions, social justice-wise, is not just to sit on it and say, oh, I feel better now that you all did this. That's not what this is about. The continued discussions that Kelly and I have, and other people who are willing, like this body that you've brought together, it's been so enriching, is to take this conversation, use it within what I do, and plan, make it a strategic part of my long-term 5-year strategic plan artistically. So that's how social justice for me works for our children that I work with and the families. I'll give one last thing, and Kelly, it's yours. We did several years ago a performance called We Remember for the state recognition of the Holocaust survivors that live here in Tennessee. And we did music that was in Yiddish from a program we'd done at the symphony for the Violins of Hope, but only this was called the Voices of Hope. Well, one of the children I mentioned the first time I spoke says is now involved in social justice, has, because of these experiences she's had and the discussions we've had, she's now an intern at the Holocaust Commission for the state of Tennessee. That's what we're trying to provide them, a balance of what you can do as a social justice person. It's not just you, it's what can you now go and do.
Kelly?
I don't know how I follow everything Margaret just said, and Lauren, amazing. I mean, a ditto to everything from both of you. I think one thing that lit up, Margaret, when you were talking was this idea about how art is alive and how it's in a conversation. And it made me think about Jonathan Bailey Holland, who was here,
Yes.
and how he wrote a piece that had the words from the Met Singers, but also he went to the library, into the civil rights room there, and he spoke with Andrea Blackman, and he looked and he read a poem that was on the wall at the library that was written by Stephanie Pruitt. And that poem was also created from words from the Nashville community. And so all of these things synthesized into a new piece of art that Jonathan wrote and created. And so even Joelle, for you, right, this idea of, encountering a piece of art, synthesizing that with what's happening in our lives today and creating something new from that. And that's where I get excited to this work of social justice too, right? Like, what new pieces of art will be created and composed as a result of hearing 7 Last Words of the Unarmed? And how will that propel this conversation forward? And so I think that's a part of our work, right? Creating an environment and space and supporting an ecosystem that allows for that creation of new art and continues that conversation forward, all in relation to each other. Then just a logistical thing to say as an organization. I mean, we think about how are we reflecting these values in every layer of our organization? So not only the composers that we commission, the composers we perform, the artists on stage, the venues where we perform, our board, all of these things. And admittedly, we have work to do, right? Like, we are not where we need to be. But I think at the beginning of this work, we thought, we're performing, works by people of color. This is great. But hey, then look at who's performing them and playing them on stage. It doesn't reflect that diversity. And so a commitment to that ongoing work and realizing that it has to be in every layer of your organization is something that we live every day and that we try to address every day. But just this idea of partnership too, going back to what John said earlier, I think that is how we are engaging in this work of social justice. It's by working with partners and lifting up those partners and listening to those partners and just kind of sharing that creative thing together with the idea that what we make together will be more powerful and impactful than what we could ever do alone.
So I have one more question that I want to ask each of you to touch on. Between police brutality, economic inequality, the gender gap, underfunding of public education, climate change, systemic breakdown of healthcare. I feel like it would be easy for an organization to think, I can't advocate around all of that. It's too much. What would you say to those organizations that want to make the world a better place and panic over the fact that they're not going to be able to completely fix the world? What would you say to those groups? Let's start with Patrick.
Wow, that is heavy. But as you were saying it, and just what would you say? My mother often says, so she has a lot of little sayings that like stay with me all the time. But one of them is, every little bit helps. Every little bit helps. She's always said that, if you're trying to raise money, if you're trying to do something or you need something, like every little bit helps, right? And so that's the first thing I would say is every little bit helps. Like try doing something. But that doesn't mean that your first try is your only try. It's not your last try. It's a continual try. Kelly has said, we have work to do. But I will also say that as an organization, from my observation, Intersection is doing more and is trying more than many others in our community and across the country, honestly, right? So she's doing her little bit, and her little bit amounts to something larger going down. That work continues. So do your little bit, continue to do your little bit, and then also check your intention. It's a big thing that I talk about a lot within the Wakanda family, within our villages, within our communities. It's about intention. What is your intention to doing better? Is your intention to bring in audiences? Is your intention to make money? Or is your intention to actually amplify people and communities and voices that need to be amplified? Because then that's gonna make you, and if you have that question throughout your process of trying, that's going to also make you do some things, and it may even make you sacrifice. It may even have you to say, I need to step down, or it may even have you to say, I need to invest, or it may even have you to say, I step up. And it all depends, but your little bit and your intentions really go a long way.
Lauren?
I like the intention conversation. When we think about intention, we also have to think about impact. And to minimize the impact, you can't do this work in a silo. So you need to go off of what Pastor Faison said. You have to work in partnership with one another. You have to bring in the communities that you are accountable to so that they can be at the decision-making table with you, so that you're not leading with the best of intentions, but your impact is going to be a little skewed, or making people feel as if you're patronizing them by making decisions because you think through a certain gaze of a not so lived experience that that's the best way to go. You have to bring in multiple lived experiences into a space so that you can determine what that next step is. Strategic planning, making sure that you're developing those 5-year plans, making sure that you're putting in policies in place that can actually impact systemic structures. And so when you think about what little bit you can do, in my experience working in institutions, I realize how easy it is to shift the policy. It's so easy for somebody to just type it up on their little word computer and say, board, vote this in. It's so easy for that to happen. So when you're thinking about the policies that impact people in their lived experiences, people in their bodies, Black people, brown people, indigenous folks, their lived bodies, how they walk about this world. When you write those policies, think about what does it mean for for us to account for their lived experiences and to bring those voices into the conversations while making those policies.
Kelly?
Sure. So we, in response to the recent moment where we are, our organization crafted a statement, right? As many organizations in our community have. And one of our board members responded by saying, it's not much, but it's a step, and a journey begins with a step. And I know that that's kind of a statement that has floated right in the consciousness of people for a long time, this idea that a journey begins with one step. And so I think it is kind of saying all the things Patrick and Lauren are saying too, right? A little bit helps. And you start with a step, and you take another step, and you take another step, and then before you know it, you are somewhere different than where you were, where you began, and you've made a change. So that's one thing. I think also this concept of power, sometimes we may not realize the power that we have, and we all have some power, whether it's in our family or in our, with our friends or whatever community we're in, we all have some power. And how are we using that power? How are we exercising that power? And what can we do with that power? And so that's been something that I think we've thought about as an organization. We have some power. How are we using that? And then just this, Lauren, I love what you're saying about policy, right? Because I think it's really important for organizations to think about policy too, and how can we, in a sense, bake it into our identity as an organization, so that if I'm not there, or Margaret's not there, whoever isn't there, that this work can sustain beyond us. And again, to the point of we have work to do, we're still working on what that looks like for our organization, but I think that's the ultimate goal, that it's kind of just such a part of our DNA, that it will go on and live on beyond just the people who may be there in that given moment.
Pastor Faison?
This has been an awesome discussion, man. I'm trying to answer this question. What do you do and not become overwhelmed with the challenges and the issues that are around you? But how do you make an impact? Justice is like politics. We say politics is local. All politics is local. Justice is local too. It starts with where you are. It begins in the context in which you have been placed. So I think the first step to addressing the issues and the ills that may be around us and not becoming overwhelmed is to figure out what are the needs around me. What's happening where I am before I want to go fight in Sudan, before I want to go to Greenland, or before I want to go to South America. What zip code do I live in? And what organization, what arena and area does my organization impact? What are the needs there? So I start there. And the first step in that is learning the art of listening. It's not showing up with some patriarchal attitude that says, I have all of the answers, show me the problems. It is first listening to what the problem is, listening to the people who live it every single day, discovering the lived experiences, as I think Lauren was sharing, figuring out what it means to exist and to live in particular arenas. And that takes listening. I can't come, we're seeing this all throughout our country and across the world, that people are now being awakened to the presence of injustice as if it just showed up. No, it's been here a while, but now people are being awakened to it. The danger of that is when you are used to always being the decision maker and always having the power and the leverage in moments, is that you show up trying to give answers and provide leadership to spaces where leadership is already active, leadership is already present and happening. You don't show up late to a party and then try to host it. No, you're late. There's already stuff happening. Figure out what's going on. Listen to what the needs are, and never underestimate the power of presence. Some spaces we're called to lead in. Other spaces we're called to support those who are already leading. But if you show up and you are present and supportive and just as skilled as a follower as you are a leader, you'll be surprised the kind of impact that can be made in those spaces. So discovering your needs around you is first. Then there's some self-inventory. Because I can't do everything, I've got to look at what I do well. What are my gifts? What is my organization? What is my particular group or setting? What are we gifted to do? We can't do everything, but what do we do well? And then take those gifts and then figure out, what do we love to do? What are we passionate about? So there are two things I'm looking for. I'm looking for gifts and I'm looking for passion. If I know what I do well, and I also intersect that with what I love to do, purpose shows up when my gifts and my passions meet a deep need in the world. So it's not necessarily about trying to fix everything. It's about discovering what are we uniquely gifted and passion-filled about, and then taking that capacity and that ability and applying it to deep needs in the world, right where we are.
Margaret? Hang on. Here you are. Let's unmute you.
Yeah.
Hang on, I hit the button too. There you are.
Amen. That's the first thing. The whole time, I'm glad some people went before me, because two words that just kept sticking in my mind, and amen again. And I guess, it's providence. I'm following you because my two words are this: mustard seeds. You can't do anything unless you have something to start with. And it can be as small as a mustard seed. And everyone has a job in caring for the mustard seed. The eye can't do the foot's job. The hand can't do the eye's job. We all have a skill to use to create and nurture this mustard seed. I look at every child as a mustard seed. And what gifts do I have? And what gifts do I not have? Therefore, I partner with others because they bring their gifts, and together we sort through, like you sift through sand to find something. You sift through wheat, get the husk away so you have what you can use to make bread with, flour from. You have to start and know that what you're doing, as Patrick said, little bitty, even smaller, is the mustard seed. And if we don't start planting those and nurturing those in our children, in our families, in our communities, none of this social justice stuff works. It's bringing back to the center and to the focus that each person is important, no matter the color. Each person is in color. But if there is injustice, then we need to face it and not say, oh, because my people long before me, we were ones who enslaved you. Okay, get over it. That's a mustard seed that didn't take root. It didn't need to. It fell on hollow ground. We need to look at the mustard seeds that grow and flourish and that engage all of us in moving forward, no matter where that is. We have to nourish it. We have to culture it. We have to let it grow and then move on to another mustard seed if we need to. But we have to start somewhere. Whatever you do in that organization, as several of you have already said, it may seem small, but mustard seeds, even smaller, can grow if nurtured. And that's what I think we're about. In the arts, we're constantly nurturing one art and melding it with something else to create something new. That's what we as organizations need to continue to do, and have hard discussions about how we do it, and yet respectfully listen and move forward together as we can.
Joelle?
This is very difficult to follow all of these amazing answers, which I second all of them. And I think what I can speak to in response to this question is that noting the things that you mentioned, these societal ills that are plaguing us, police brutality, economic inequality, the gender gap, and so on and so forth, are rooted in, they're all symptoms of the same illness, that they're rooted in this system of exploitation and built on this incorrect hierarchy that perpetuates the inequality that we are, and inequity that we're experiencing to this day. And so I really second Pastor Faison's words that we should start local, start with what's around us. But even before that, one might want to start with oneself and look inward. I think what's been alarming is that not a lot of people have acquired the skills of introspection that is necessary for existing in this world as a Black person. You have to be able to look inward and understand how people perceive you in order to survive. And I hope that the majority of Americans can acquire that skill as soon as possible, because I think it's necessary for moving forward. Really taking a deep, hard, long look inward, assessing the unearned advantages that we all have. As a male living in a patriarchal society, I have to constantly, especially in the business of classical music, am I being afforded an opportunity that would not be afforded to a female composer, a Black female composer? What can I do to address that inequity? Maybe if I'm commissioned and, for, addressing a specific issue, and I don't feel that I should speak to it, I should hand this to someone else who can, better speak to it according to their lived experience. And so these are things I think that heads of organizations and also just members of organizations can do in order to start this. Every little bit helps, like Patrick said. So yeah.
As we all consider our position as a seed right now, thank you, Joel Thompson. Thank you, Lauren Fitzgerald, Kelly Corcoran, Pastor John Faison, and Patrick Dailey, and Margaret Campbell-Holman. I appreciate all of your time. Thank you, audience, for tuning into this panel discussion and tuning into Classically Speaking.